sitting here with a true living legend, bass player Leland Sklar, currently on a huge world tour with Phil Collins.
Yeah.
So, welcome to Munich.
Oh, it's great to be back. I've been here many times and I love the city. So, wish we had more time.
It's always the same problem, right?
Yeah.
So, just very quickly, for those of you who don't know Lee, I would advise anybody to check Google or Wikipedia. He has literally played 1,000 of recordings beginning in the early 70s.
Yeah.
With artists like James Taylor, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Jackson Browne, forming a legendary sidemen band, The Section, has played on many scores for film and TV. Few people know Magnum P.I. It's pretty popular in Germany, so
yeah, maybe so.
So the whole list is nothing short of impressive.
I feel very fortunate. Yeah, it's been a good run.
For sure. So how is the tour been going so far?
It's been going great. I mean, we're kind of just sort of amazed. You know, I mean, Phil's had, just a huge following, but we've done South America, Mexico, Puerto Rico, New Zealand, Australia, some Europe for starting the tour, and then we did America, and now we're back doing Europe, and then we're going to go back to America. And he's selling out, stadiums. We just played in Holland the other night. There was almost 70,000 people at the show. I mean, and he's just sitting in a chair now, so, I mean, they're still completely into it. So we're kind of blown away by the whole thing, but it's great. It's great. The show's great. The band's great. We've got his son Nicholas is drumming with us now, and it's kind of like the baton's been passed on now from Phil to his son. So, no, I'm loving it. I'm sorry I'm glad it's ending for the moment, just because everybody's tired. We have 3 more shows here in Munich and Prague and Warsaw, and then we all go home and get a break at that point and do other things. So, but happy as a clam, as we say.
Great. So, how physically demanding is a tour like this for you? How are you trying to stay healthy and fit?
Mostly it's, it's like there's certain tricks to it for me. You get into a hotel, and most of the time I try to take the stairs. And I get out and walk as much as I can. We have caterers on the tour, and a lot of people say, oh God, you go on the road and eat nothing but junk food. We got these really good caterers, so you can really eat healthy food. So it's really not that bad. Everybody's in pretty good shape on this, and the show's slightly physically demanding. It's not like being in a like a Backstreet Boys show or something where it's all jumping around and dancing. I mean, it's we're pretty much the rhythm section's kind of sedentary, but it's not really that hard out here. And if you're not a drinker or smoker or anything like that, it's really not that difficult.
So it's just rock and roll without the
rest. Same old shit, as they say. We're all doing good. Everybody's really good.
Talking about this, so Phil Collins, you have recorded and toured with the man for many, many years now.
Yeah, we started in '84.
Wow. So now a 2-part question. How has the Phil Collins tour and concert changed since the early 80s? And part number 2, so we all know, I just mentioned Phil's physical problems.
Yeah.
So except that he presents his song sitting on a chair now, what other changes have been made to the show so it works, or if any?
Things get modified, of course, as years go on. I mean, so much of the show in the early days was his physicality. Because he was playing drums, he played some keyboards, he was always running around the stage, so he was incredibly active. He's the most dramatic change in the show. I haven't really. I'm not going out with as much gear as I did back in the early days, because on those earlier tours I was taking Taurus pedals and all kinds of stuff with me. And with a large band like we have now, because we have 4 horns and 4 singers and 2 guitars and percussion and drums and keyboards, I've stripped my rig down to just a bass, a cable, and an amp, and that's it. But the biggest difference is the fact that Phil's just sitting on a stool for most of the show, and it's because he had a really bad back surgery. He had a back surgery that went bad, and he developed a condition, I think it's called drop foot, where his right leg, he just doesn't have a lot of feeling in it, so he has to walk with a cane to support himself. And but the thing is, the people that come to the shows really, they kind of just want to see Phil Collins, and they want to hear those songs, and we're doing Genesis songs in the show, and so at this point, the audience response feels like the old days. I mean, they're going nuts and jumping all over and singing along with everything. It's just that he's not this active person on stage. But I think to get started with this whole tour, I think that was probably something in the back of his mind. Would they accept me? And they did. So it's been going great. Other than that, the bands have changed a bit over the years. I mean, when we started, it was the Phoenix horn section, and now it's the Vine Street horns. And Harry Kim, one of the trumpet players, was a transition guy between the two sections. But two of the guys in the Phoenix horns died, and so things changed there. But it still feels like the old days up there. I mean, everybody's still. I mean, I look over and I see Daryl Sturmer right next to me, and I've been with Daryl since '84, and he still plays unbelievably great. And so everybody's still at the top of their game. So the shows are really good. Nothing to it's no costume. I mean, there hasn't been a big production change. Every time we've toured, it's been a pretty decent big production, and each time they would create a new production for that tour. So this one's really, really nice. It's mostly big screens, so there's a lot of, it's hard when you play big arenas and stadiums, because you see these people out there that are this big, but when you've got like a 40-foot screen, even the people in the back seats get to see the show. I mean, we've got a lot of cameras involved, so the show's pretty well covered. And in the old days, we didn't have that. Right. So that's, some technology's changed, and certainly sound systems have improved over the years and things like that. So it's a real satisfying show, though. So I'm hoping the people that are all coming to these are walking away going,
I'm looking forward to see it on Monday.
Yeah.
I will quickly check if everything is running. I get neurotic sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's always
we sit here for an hour and there's nothing on it. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Of course, I cut that out.
Yeah, that's fine. No, leave that in. That makes it real. That's the technology of today.
So you already mentioned your bass setup. Let me just get back to that quickly. Yeah. You're actually known in recent years for a relatively basic, not too complicated setup, generally. Yeah. On most pictures I've seen you on this tour so far, I see you with your blue Dingwall bass, which I think is a 5-string, right? So you have two basses on this tour with you?
What I've got is I've got two Dingwalls with me.
Okay.
Just one is a backup in case anything breaks. When the tour started, I was using my Dingwall and my Warwick. But just kind of going back and forth between instruments. Each is a little different EQ, and I thought just to simplify things for the front of house guy, I would just use the 5-string, because most of the material needed a 5-string, and my signature model's a 4-string with Warwick. So I'm using my Dingwall and a euphonic audio amplifier. They're out of New Jersey. I've got a 4x10 bottom and a 1x12 bottom. And instead of a microphone in front of the 12, I use a Yamaha sub-kick. Okay. And put that like about 1/4 of an inch off the grill of that. So I mix a DI and that. Okay. And our front of house mixer, Michel Collin, is like an amazing house mixer, because I have people coming up and say, this is the worst hall. I've hated concerts, and it sounded like a CD out there. It's so much is in those guys' hands. Definitely. And Michel's great, but I don't use any pedals or anything. I mean, I've got a warehouse full of that kind of stuff at home. But I always kind of think that one of the best things you can do for a show is give, especially the front of house guy, something he can build from. And if you've got like a keyboard that's got effects and you've got the guitars got delay and all that, if the bass is pure, then everything else kind of fits. If the bass is suddenly using all kinds of effects and stuff, unless the songs are written for that, it can just get a little muddy. So the first time I worked with Michel, I said, "Is it cool if I don't use anything?" He said, "Great." Great. So it's just my bass, a cable, and an amp, and that's it.
Okay. So talking about technology, I was just wondering if a guy like you, like if you are at home or something, and either work on some ideas or try. You probably even practice.
Oh,
I suppose,
all the time.
Do you use like what people use today, like on an iPad? You plug in with a preamp USB to an iPad and fiddle with this a bit to play around with this? Or?
I have an old Tascam. Used to make a little bass practice unit.
Okay. Right.
And so all I do is I just plug my bass into that, my headphones into that, and then there's an out, and I plug that into the headphone out on my laptop.
Okay.
And that's how I learn material, just playing it over and over.
Okay.
So like when I was getting ready to start this leg of the tour, every day I would just go in and run the show just to feel fresh, because one of the things I think that's important, and this was kind of Phil's philosophy from the first time I met him, is he always thought that the first audience deserves as good a show as the last audience. Where so many bands go out and spend the first week or two kind of refining their show. And I think it's kind of ripping them off. You know? So we put a lot of effort into preparing for it. And so that's the unit I've got. I don't really have a home recording setup or anything, and that's probably one of the dumbest things I've ever done, because for years I've had people saying, "Can we send you, files and stuff, and can you overdo?" And I always just say no. I just when I get home, it's really hard to not take care of home, and just to go lock myself up and play. Maybe someday I'll do it. I don't know, but at this point, it's getting pretty late in life to start setting up and opening that up. So, but I don't have a setup where all the guys are all talking about different Pro Tools Logic questions and all this stuff, and I go, but I know enough guys with home studios. If I really want to do something, I'll call them and say, "Can we do it at your house?" And we'll go out and have lunch. So just play it by ear.
Okay. So I want to quickly jump to your very beginnings. You mentioned
I was a sperm.
You're a good swimmer, I hope.
Oh yeah, it was all upstream.
You started out as a piano player, and you were quite good, and you were diligent and working on it, and you won youth competitions and things like that.
Yeah.
And before you switched to bass, actually, so I was just wondering, these days, does it ever occur that you sit down at the piano just to work on something, or just for kicks?
Not really. When I started, I was about going on 5 years old when I began, and it was one of these things. We had a baby grand piano in the house, and I mean it's really funny. I loved the pianist Liberace, who was very famous back in the 40s and 50s, and had his own TV show. Very flamboyant. I mean, Elton basically was Liberace. I mean, it's all style and big piano rings and candelabra on the piano. And as a little kid, I saw this. I thought, this is pretty cool. So I started playing piano. My parents got me a teacher, and I really took to it. But during the course of my piano career, it became incredibly stressful. And I ended up really just kind of messed up from it because of pressure for learning pieces. It was all classical. I never did anything but classical. And I was kind of really just burned out with it. So when I went into junior high school at 12 years old, I kind of went, I'm here, I'll be a piano player. And the teacher, his name was Ted Lynn, just said, look, we have a lot of kids that play piano, but we could use a string bass player. And Honestly, I really didn't quite know what string bass was at that point. And he pulled out this old K plywood, a blonde upright, and he said, well, here's the instrument we've got. And he put it in my hand, showed me how to hold it, and I hit a note and felt that vibration. And I just looked at him and said, sold. I said, I like this. And it got me away from the piano, and I just focused on that. And the piano's always, I just had kind of a sour taste from it, so I've never, if I sit down at it, I can play it, but it just doesn't, it served its purpose in the day. The only thing at this point that I'm happy that I was a student of piano is that when I'm doing studio work, first off, reading music was never an issue by the time studio work started.
You know all the bass?
Yeah,
notes.
I know all the bass, but also, being a pianist, I also know tenor and treble clef. So if a copy is screwed up and suddenly I get a bass part and it's in treble clef, I can transpose it, and it opened up a lot of things, because I know a lot of good guys that are monsters players. Guys like Pino Palladino that says, I can't read music. Why don't you learn how to read music? You're one of the best bass players that I've ever heard. And but to me, it's not a difficult process to learn. You just have, like to anything, you just devote yourself to it. And it's just mathematics for the most part. Once you recognize where everything sits and values.
But of course, as a kid, I don't remember how I learned it. I just did.
Yeah.
That's the benefit of.
That's the benefit of starting anything early, like language or anything like that. You're not full of self-doubt yet, where you think I'm going to fail. You're just going to do it.
Yeah.
So the piano's kind of always been on the back burner. And plus, once my career started, I was working with like the best musicians in the world, and the thought of sitting down at the piano when you're in a studio with all these monsters, and you're just going, no, you play piano.
And also maybe when you, not on this tour, I believe, but when you use bass pedals, it's also associated.
It's all associated.
Yeah.
And I love having the Taurus pedals, but it's just out here. It's another thing for them to set up. It's another, it's funny. We were just had Sheryl Crow and her band was opening for us, and I'm looking. They've got like all the guys up there with all those cases of instruments up there. They're bringing out different basses and all this stuff. And I'm going, I just got this one bass sitting out here, and he had his pedal board with all kinds of stuff on it, an octave divider, and some chorusing. And I'm going, that's great, but I just kind of look over at my area, and it's just two wedges, because I'm the only guy on stage that doesn't wear in-ears. So, I like wedges, man. I don't like that sound pressure. I want to hear the band. I don't want to be in a studio.
I was going to ask about that earlier, and actually I forgot how the stage sound has changed. And you say you like the monitors,
Yeah.
And as opposed to in-ear monitoring.
Yeah, I really like just the feel of hearing everything acoustically. And I've tried in-ears, and they're really great, but it's kind of like being in the studio. You're refining this. And it's really funny, because like when any of the other guys come over and stand next to me, they all go, oh man, this is really cool. They can feel the pump of it all. But the thing that's great, like with Phil's show, is literally in the loudest song on the show, we could talk like this on stage, because we're not using big gear. It's almost like a club vibe on stage. And then you've got this, $1 billion sound system that you've paid for. So, let the front of house guy, do his job. Because so many times you go to these gigs and you look at the front of house mixer, and half the faders are down because the guys are playing so loud on stage that you do that, it's not going to make any difference. And so we try to keep the levels really under control on stage, and it just makes for a much better show out front for the audience.
I'm sure. I want to talk a little bit about your career as a session player. So, actually, going a little more back in history again, like when I first read your name, thank God there were liner notes.
Yeah.
Because I was this kid and I was lending borrowing these albums from friends and stuff, and CDs also. And your name would reoccur, you know?
Well,
So
I'll tell you something about that. Is we were very, very fortunate. I owe so much to Peter Asher, who was in the group Peter and Gordon back in the days of the British invasion. But when he did the early James Taylor records with us, he insisted that our names appear on the records. He was one of the first guys that got recognition for the players on a record. Because you look back, I don't know if you've seen the Wrecking Crew movie, but all those guys, they played on everything, but nobody knew it was the same guys playing on everybody's records. We all owe so much to Peter for having done that, because when James suddenly became like this huge artist, people could look at the record and they'd see Russ Kunkel and Danny Kortchmar and my name, and they would be signing like somebody like Jackson Browne or whoever, and they'd say, I love this sound on that, so let's get those guys. And so that really pushed us along. So that really, if that hadn't happened, I'm not sure if my career would have been the same. If I was in the same situation as the Wrecking Crew guys were, Carol Kay and all those people, because they never got the recognition that they deserved.
I see.
They had work, but not recognition.
Right. And so what struck me was when I look at these lists of people who were played on a particular song, oftentimes, like on the record, say, like for example, like Don Henley's "I Can't Stand Still," you played on that one, and I believe you played like on maybe 3 songs on that album, is that possible? 3 or 4, I don't know.
Yeah.
How does that come about? Is it like, does this have artistic reasons? Or is it because of availability of a particular person?
Probably a little of everything.
Okay. I mean, there are some songs, you mentioned Pino Palladino.
Yeah.
I mean, he's probably the go-to fretless bass player.
Yeah. At that time, he was like...
Anybody who wanted fretless probably calls him, But other than that, and I saw it a number of times that people are like, on an album, they are like 3-4 bass players. And I just wondered how that's...
Yeah, I think there's also a lot of times where... there's a certain ego involved by the artist or the producer, and they sort of think the more names they can get on the record, the cooler. You really go through that a lot with Japanese artists, where they really want to pack that thing with like an all-star, rhythm sections. So they have like, like I'll go in and work on somebody's record and I'll do like 3 songs, and then Abe Laboriel will come in with another drummer and keyboard and all those guys, and they'll do like 3 songs, and then they'll have another guy come in, and so they get all these, this whole list of everybody on there. And sometimes it was just, looking for certain guys that fit songs. They were just conceptually doing it. And it's, it's funny because I've forgotten most of these things, and it's funny when people come up and they bring albums up to be signed on the road, and you're looking, I don't remember this at all. And you look, put your names on it, and it might be on 1 song or 8 songs, you never know. And sometimes it was scheduling, like, you would just grab a window in this, like if you're on tour and you're only in town for like a week, and they go, can you come in and do a couple of songs with us? So, but almost every question has variable answers to it. It's everything from scheduling to programming to figuring out what's going on. And sometimes there's multiple producers, and those producers have their guys that they like to work with. So you don't know. It's just grateful to be working.
I'm sure. So at which point did you make the conscious decision to be a session player as opposed to join a band and become a full-fledged member?
I didn't really make a conscious... I mean, when I met James Taylor, I was still in college, and I was a science and art co-majors. But I was always in bands, and we were playing clubs on weekends just to pay the rent and things like that. And I was in a band at that time called Wolfgang in the late 60s, like 68, 69. And Bill Graham was our manager, and his real name was Wolfgang, so we named the band
German
after
first
him.
name.
How better to kiss up to your manager than to name your band after him. But James ended up coming to a couple of our rehearsals because we had a drummer named Bugs Pemberton, and there was a guy named Jackie Lomax back in the 60s in England. It was Jackie Lomax and the Undertakers, and Jackie Lomax looked like a matinee idol. And they kind of were rivals of the Beatles back before the Beatles really hit. And then Bugs came to America, and we had this band, and he had a friend of his named John Fishbeck. And John Fishbeck owned a studio called Crystal Recorders in Hollywood, and he did all the early Stevie Wonder records and stuff, Songs in the Key of Life and all that. And he had a childhood friend that he brought to a rehearsal, and it was James. And so James hung out a bit, and we met each other, and that was it. But then James's his Apple record came out, and he got offered a gig at the Troubadour in Los Angeles. And he remembered me from this rehearsal and mentioned it to Peter Asher. And Peter Asher contacted me and said, "Can you play this show with us?" And that was where I met Danny Kortchmar. And I had met Russ before that, but this was the first time I had played with Russ. And I said, "Yeah, sure." And all of a sudden, everything happened. And James took off, and he was on the cover of Time magazine and all. And suddenly, I've got like finals coming up in school and stuff. And I ended up quitting, just walked out of college one day and never got my degree. I was there 5 years, and we went on the road, and I'm basically still doing that. But it's hard, like I've gone and done master class at Berkeley and all this. And guys always go, how did you do this? And I go, I really didn't try. It wasn't one of these things I said, I got to be a studio guy. I got to be this. It just happened because it was like a perfect storm. It was the right situation at the right time. And when that right opportunity came along, I had the right abilities for it. So I could, sometimes you might get an opportunity, but you don't have the chops or whatever to do it. So I was very fortunate that happened. And I would love to have been in a band, that made it. It would have been,
So, say, in 1979, when the Eagles needed a new bass player, just a mind game, and they would have called you, would you say?
Oh, I would have said sure. But I don't know if I would have had the confidence as a singer. I mean, I can sing background parts, but, Timothy's really good. And when Meisner left the group, that was that. But there's been a few things like that. But a lot of times, I find myself, it's a funny situation where I'll sit there sometimes and think, Flea has only had to know Chili Peppers. That's it. he's made a fortune being in the Chili Peppers. But those are the only songs he's ever had to learn. And then some guy was doing an article about me, and he really dug in deep, and he said, well, kind of I'm rounding it off to that you've worked on like 26,000 songs. And I'm thinking every project I'm like joining a new band. So you're not just a session player, you're getting into the psychology of that artist, what they're looking for, the kind of vibe, and it can be, one day you're doing ska, the next day you're doing country, the next day you're doing funk. So these demands, and I'm kind of going, it would have been great to have been in a band and just do that. But on the other hand, I would have hated to give up all these other experiences. I look at Bill Wyman, just had to do the Stones. If anything they do beyond that is their call. But that group has set them up for life. And for me, I'm still just a blue-collar worker. I get hired for an hourly wage, and that's what I do. But it's like the old fable of the tortoise and the hare. And a lot of guys are that hare where it's like they're like off and running and it's huge, and then it's over. And I'd rather just be the tortoise kind of plodding along, because I've been doing it over 50 years now, and I'm still busy. I'm really grateful for that. So it's you kind of weigh both things.
In Germany, what is different, I believe, legally to the US is that if you are part of a recording of a song, it's I don't know the exact English expression for that, but in Germany usually it's not a right to work. In Germany, you're part of this. So you are. It's sort of like a royalty. It's not as much as a songwriting royalty, but it is. So, but I think it's different in the US. Right?
Well, they have sort of a slightly similar thing. They have excuse me. They have a thing that they call their special payments fund, and a certain amount of money, like depending on all the work you do, it's not like per thing. It's just kind of how much money you've put into the union and all that. They'll send you, at one point during the year, you'll get a check for that. In the old days, those could be really good. In this day and age, they don't really amount to much. And then there's also some people, I'm dealing with some guys in Canada that search out all these European, Asian markets and stuff for royalties, and you can get some stuff, but it's musicians really basically are always getting screwed. I mean, it's really the tragedy of it all. Even like in Los Angeles right now, this is a national problem for the American Federation of Musicians, but they said there's a serious problem with the pension fund in the union, that it's leaning towards insolvency. So they said we may have to, for all the people that are on pension, they may reduce your pension even though you're the one that paid for it. But it's because it was incompetently run. And I look at young guys coming up in the business, and they're never going to see a pension. It'll be long gone by the time they get in, because there isn't that much studio work being done. So much is independent at this point. People are self-financing, not going through the union, and or they know somebody who's made a bunch of money, like in tech industries, and always wanted to have something to do with music, and they meet somebody who's a guitar player or something. They say, "Oh, I'll pay for your record," but they don't know what to do with it after they've made it. So it's a funny time in this industry. I don't like to discourage people from going into it, because there's so many great musicians and writers out there, but the real problem is the business side of it. Is what do you do with this after you've recorded it? A novelty video that maybe you put on YouTube or something. But in the old days, you had record labels, and they would screw you, but they would get you airplay, and they had a machine for promotion and all that. So different world.
I will get into this a little bit later, actually, also. And just because you mentioned the union, I was just wondering if it served you as a sort of insurance against the military draft in the early 70s, because you had those regular studio gigs.
No, it had nothing to do with it. That kind of work would not protect you. Okay. You might get lucky, and if you got drafted, you might end up being in a military band. If you went in and said, I'm a musician, they might use you. But for the most part, there's that kind of stuff. The only stuff that ever got you out of any military service would generally be medical problems, and or if there was some very, very serious home problems, and you were like sole supporter of the family and all that. But the union itself is really one of the most incompetent unions, I think, in the world. As compared to, I have a lot of friends that are actors and stuff, and I look at SAG and AFTRA, and they have incredible health plans, and all. I look at the musicians union, and it's like completely useless. So all the players bitch about it. It's just sort of a drag, but you deal with it. I'm an old fart. I'm on my pension now and all that stuff, and Social Security. I get senior discounts when I go to the movies, and it's great.
Another two-part question now.
Okay.
I'm going to jump to 1973 Spectrum.
Oh, great.
So this marked a bit of a departure for you, I would say, stylistically in a way, because it was a fusion jazz recording. How did it come about you played on that record?
At that point, we had our group, The Section, together. It was Danny Kortchmar, Russ, Kunkel, Craig Doerge, and myself. And Peter Asher had a partner, Nat Weiss, and Nat was an attorney in New York, a divorce lawyer, I think. And Nat was also in the music business, and he was handling Mahavishnu Orchestra. So they put us out as the opening act for Mahavishnu Orchestra. So we spent 5 weeks, 6 weeks on the road with those guys. And when that ended, Billy and I had hit it off. We'd been, hanging out all the time and stuff. And when that ended, he just called me one day and he said, "Look, I got a record deal. You want to come to New York said, I'd love to. And flew there, I think, on a Sunday night, and we were in the studio Monday and Tuesday, pretty much did everything. And then they did one day with Ron Carter and like a big band thing. There were 2 songs on the album that was done with a different section.
It was the acoustic bass,
Yeah.
was Ron Carter?
Yeah. And but other than that, we cut everything. Everything on there's almost first, second take on it. And then I was thrilled because Tommy Bolin and I were friends, and I knew Tommy when I was in Wolfgang. He was in a band Zephyr, and so we had the same manager who was basically the same criminal, and we would work together and stuff. So I was totally shocked when I walked. We did it at Electric Ladyland with Ken Scott Engineering. And I walk in the studio and there's Tommy. I went, man, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? So it was great. And he went in a day early to learn, just to sort out the heads of the tunes. I was more used to doing studio work and stuff at that point. So when I got in, Jan had sketched out a couple of things, and then we just ran over those things, and then Billy just counted them off, and we just went for it. And it's really funny because I've done projects like that over the years, but just everybody always thought of me as like kind of this soft rock guy. Yet all the bands I was in before I met James were all kind of like hard rock bands. I mean, I was totally like Zeppelin and Hendrix and Cream, and that was the kind of music I was listening to. I really wasn't listening to folk music and that. So it was kind of funny to suddenly get pigeonholed into that. So that was the good thing, that I was taking everything that came in. So I would end up doing like TV and commercials and movies, and then be with Streisand one day, and Manilow and all these kind of people, and then just doing rock and roll bands and metal bands. So I've really tried to stay as diverse as I can with this, just to keep it all kind of fresh and surprise people too. But it's amazing, if I go in the studio and I sit down and I just go guys go crazy and the drummer jumps in and the fact that was 1973 when we recorded that, and it still sounds fresh at this point. It's pretty remarkable. It says a great deal.
It's been used in a video game.
Oh, I don't know.
And
Massive Attack.
Massive Attack is a sample or something.
Yeah, they sampled it all. I mean, it's really. It was really funny. It was 1973, 1983. I think in 2003, Billy called me and he said, we only played these songs like a couple of times, and everybody else lived these songs. But he said, it's 30th anniversary. Do you want to do a little tour? And that was the only other time we ever played. And so we went out, and it was Gary Husband playing keyboards and Dean Browne playing guitar. And it was funny. We were playing we did like 15 shows in 16 days, one of those kind of things. And,
was it in the U.S.? Or?
Yeah, just in the U.S. But you really get the characters come to those shows for that kind of music, because there were guys in the front row who were sitting, maybe a little farther away than you, and they had binoculars. They're like watching your cuticles when you play. I was just looking and going, are you out of your fucking mind? What are you doing? Stop this. This is creepy, weird. But it was fun. But that record really, I listened to it and it still sounds fresh. And especially in that period, I think the reason that record worked as well as it did, because that was, during the same time with Mahavishnu and Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock and everybody. This was the only one that half the band was rock and roll players and half the band was like fusion players. So, Billy and Jan were really coming right out of the Mahavishnu thing. But for the most part, Tommy Bolin was, coming out of James Gang and Deep Purple, and I was coming out doing all this other kind of stuff. So we brought a different sensibility to it. Tommy's solos on that are some of the best guitar solos I think any guitar player's ever played, and they were all live. There's one point in that record where he and Jan are trading licks, and you hear Tommy going, and you hear he broke his E string. right in the middle of his solo. Continued blowing, played the hit. We never went in and fixed it all. I mean, I can point it out to people when I'm listening to the record. I go, listen, right there, you hear it.
Okay. I was wondering about that because I looked forever. They put this out, I don't know, sometime probably in the 90s or early 2000s as a DVD audio. Like the best available quality, you know, because they had the masters put directly into the high resolution audio. And I heard that, and I was wondering if that was intentional.
Yeah, it seemed he broke his guitar string. But he was that kind of player where, you know, and he would sit there, he had one of those old gray Echoplexes. That's the only thing he used. So all that stuff where he's like, you know, working with the slider and stuff. Man, I mean, Tommy was, when he died, I was so brokenhearted, you know, but he worshipped Hendrix, died almost the same way at the same age. You know, tragic loss for the future of that instrument with him.
Definitely.
So, but it was a great thing. It was a great experience.
And as you mentioned earlier, it was recorded in Jimi Hendrix studio.
Yeah, we had Electric Ladyland in New York.
He was actually, was it special recording there? Because he has been known later when the whole story was told, so to speak, that he likes to experiment with studio, you know, tricks, you know.
For this kind of a project, the only stuff that was really kind of experimental was before like a couple of the songs, you hear like this, you know, like almost like, you know, some kind of weird sample, you know, stuff going on. Well, Robert Moog came and was hanging out and brought in his first electronic drums, and that's what all that stuff is. That's Billy experimenting with him with these pads, just doing all that stuff. And the thing that's interesting on that is it's just hard at times. Like Mahavishnu was that way. It's hard to tell like where Jan ends and Tommy would start, because they get like the same tonality going and stuff. It's just because with Mahavishnu you would have, you know, Jerry Goodman playing violin, and then suddenly you'd have McLaughlin playing, and then you'd have Jan playing, and it's like this. The line is like moving through them all to this different color, but it's almost the same. It was a real unique experience to be on the road watching those guys every night. It was pretty mind blowing. I spent the first week, I think, trying to find one. All their time signatures, you're going, where's one? You know, by the time you find it, you've lost it. Russ, Kunkel, and I used to sit there and just watch him every night going, God, it's unbelievable. So.
And then I found you had another, like, sort of jazz fusion encounter with Lee Ritenour, but probably that record wasn't too much jazz, really, right?
Yeah, well, it's more that kind of smooth jazz that he did. But the one good thing about that was that's how I met Phil.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I knew who Phil was, and Phil knew who I was, but Lee hired both of us to work on his record. And at that point, Phil asked me if I would do his tour in '82, I think it was that. He had just finished Face Value. And I said, I'm already booked with James Taylor, I can't do it, but I said, I'd love to work with you sometimes, so, you know, keep me in mind. And then he called me in '84 to do the No Jacket Required, and, you know, we worked up till '90 with that, and then we parted ways in the '90s, and then he called me back again in 2000 and said, you know, I'd love to work again, so, you know, it's been an interesting dynamic to all of this stuff. But, yeah, I love variety of projects, and that's I work with a lot of artists from different countries, and you know, it's always interesting to me to work with Japanese, French, Italian, Argentinian, African. It's great. It just makes you wrap your head around something different.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool.
So you mentioned earlier that you were put in this soft rock genre.
Yeah.
Also, what becomes apparent in my mind when I look at your resume, you work with so many female singers or singer-songwriters, like Linda Ronstadt, Leanne Rimes, Diana Ross, Rita Coolidge, Vanessa Carlton, and more recently Judith Owen.
Yeah.
and each of those I just mentioned, it wasn't just one song or two songs. It was like many albums.
Yeah.
Most of them. So why is that? Do you think?
Because they're so much cuter than the guys. Who wouldn't want to be in a room with a female artist if you got some dude with you? No, once again, it's just interesting you get called for these projects. I mean, Rita, I knew because of her producer David Anderley, and we did a lot of stuff when she was married to Chris Christopherson, and I just saw Rita recently, and she looks great and still out there doing it. And I did a lot of work for about 10 years. I was in Nashville all the time working. And so I got to work with Reba and Patty Loveless and all these. There's so many great female artists, Trisha Yearwood and Lacey Dalton and all of these girls. And I love what women bring to it. You know, just when they're writing songs, it's coming from a different space than the way guys write songs. And a lot of them are monstrous musicians, really fine players and stuff. So it's great. You know, I like variety. And once again, to sit there and put your headphones on and Barbara Streisand singing in the studio with you, you just go, wow. It's the same feeling I had when I put headphones on and you're there with Cocker, and you just hear, or Willie Nelson, and they sing one note, and you go, oh, it's that dude, it's the guy, or it's her, Diana Ross and stuff. So it's interesting. I love that whole opportunity just to go down, a ton of avenues and not just find yourself on that one street. It keeps you vital.
Well, sure. So let's talk about Judith Owen for a minute. I just mentioned her in that list, and that was the first time I saw you play live. And actually, that was in Stuttgart in 2016, I believe.
Yeah.
And I must admit that I went there because you and Russ Kunkel were on the list. I didn't know Judith Owen.
See, that's the whole thing that happened on our tour. So many people would come up to us,
and
they
thank
would go,
God did I go.
Yeah, but they would come up to us and say, I had no idea who Judith was, but we came here to see you guys. And they go, and then immediately we would turn the conversation to Judith. And they're going, thanks, man. This was because she's a remarkable artist. She's an absolutely special artist to me. And the fact that whatever notoriety I could bring to get people in the door, as soon as they heard her, they just went, okay, I get it. This is the real deal. This is something special. And I would love to work with Judith for the rest of my life. I mean, she's one of the most dynamic artists, and she is writing constantly. I mean, we'd sit on the road every day. She'd have a new song. It's just she's really a force of nature, and I missed her. I mean, doing all the Phil touring for the past 2 years, I haven't been able to do hardly any stuff except the new album with her, and I really miss her. I'm anxious, to get a window where she can work and I can work together again, because we have a real kind of symbiotic relationship. And the thing that's really fun about those gigs is there's a number of people that came up to me and they said, I never really got to hear you play before. But the intimacy of her show, every note is there as compared to being, in a big arena or something like that. The nuances and subtleties, especially Judith and I did a lot of work just as a duo. And so we really get a dance going when we don't have time or anything, So when we have Pedro, it's great, but if Pedro isn't available, we just do it as a duo. And man, I just sit there and breathe with her. It's pretty special.
I mean, that must be interesting too, because Judith plays in different configurations all the time. Probably because she has to, but again, that makes it interesting. Like when I saw you, it was the configuration with Pedro and Russ.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was interesting.
Yeah, each time. And well, that's the beauty of an artist like that. She could do the gig at the piano by herself. She could do it with any, like she just played with the 3 string players, in London. She and I can go out. She and me and Pedro can go out. George Shelby, who's playing sax with Phil, I introduced them, and we did some gigs with Pedro, me, and George, and we've done others where just Gabby came and played cello. So it's one of these things that the essence of everything, as far as I'm concerned, in this business, is the song. It all revolves around the song, and a great song can be done in a variety of ways. And with Judith, as long as she's sitting there playing piano and singing, everything else is just, frosting on that cake. And she's smart enough that when she has, like, when I'm playing with her, she isn't as bottom heavy. She gives me the space there. But if I'm not there, she doesn't get another bass player, so she just takes over a little bit more bottom end. So she's so musical in that respect that she accommodates each of the different configurations that she does. But she's a remarkable artist. And there's been a bunch of them. I remember when I worked with Vanessa Carlton, and we walked in the studio, and I see this little squirt sitting in there at the piano, and she's like burning through Chopin. I mean, I went, oh, this is the real deal. And when we did 1,000 Miles, that album, I just went, this girl's really good. And it makes you feel good. At the end of the day, you walk out and you've really accomplished something. You've made some good music, and can't beat that. Because there's times when you walk out and you go, oh man, this really sucked. You've done the best you can, because that's what you do when you say yes to the phone call. But sometimes you go, who the hell signed this? How did this end up getting in here? But they're living their dream. You don't want to bust that bubble. Tell you, one of the hardest things about doing this also was the fact that I had to stop working with Toto.
Oh yeah.
I loved playing with Toto, especially the last tour we did when Shannon's playing and Joe was singing and Steve Piccaro and Paige were there and Luke and so. Man, that band is so much fun to play with. I mean, I've known them since they formed. I've known Luke since he was 17 years old, and that was really a kind of heartbreaker when Phil started working, and they called me and said, well, okay, we're going to work again next year. And I said, can't do it, it just broke my heart.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, I think for Toto, especially the return of Joe, I mean...
Killing it.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
I saw him twice with Joe, yeah.
It's great, and I love playing with Simon, but Shannon feels like Jeff. It brings their music back to more of the original feel on the stuff, and I love playing with Shannon. In fact, Shannon just called me I did an album 3 years ago, I don't know, time disappears, with an artist named Leeland from the Netherlands, and I think he won Holland's Got Talent or something like that, and I think Shannon's going to do his album down in Nashville in August, so he just called me because Leeland came to our show in Holland, and he was writing to me, but we didn't have time to get together. He said, I'm going to go in the studio, I'd love to work again. And then right after that, Shannon called and said, we're going to be doing it down here. So I said, great, let's do it, make that happen.
And you did play quite a bit with the Toto nucleus, for Randy Newman, right?
Yeah, well, Jeff and I worked constantly. I mean, that was one of the biggest losses of my life, was when Jeff died. He was like a brother, and we were in the studio daily together, and that was a hard one. And then Mike went through it and stuff, and then Mike asked me to replace him.
He did.
It was his call, and Luke and stuff. But Mike really said, it's just broke my heart, because I love that guy, and Steve's had issues too. So it's just. The folks are healthy, the sister's healthy, but the boys just have all had to deal with all this variety of terrible stuff. So I don't get it. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, sometimes, it just
is what it is. It's life.
Yeah. I want to jump topics real quick again.
Sure.
Actually, you mentioned this topic a bit early in the conversation. In the past 30 years, we've seen what can be addressed as an academization in music, in pop rock, jazz. like young people, they go to Berklee School of Music, come out as highly skilled instrumentalists. And in earlier times, this was the norm only in classical music.
Yeah.
You know? Like in rock and jazz, people had the instruction as kids maybe, but then, you know, learned as they went into it, you know.
Yeah.
So what is your take on this?
Well, I think the more you can learn, the better you're going to be as a musician. But it's difficult because I know when I was in college, in the music department in college, all they really were trying to do was turn out teachers. You know, and all I wanted to do was play. So on a certain level, if you want to go into the academic side of, you know, of music and maybe, you know, get a gig as an instructor, maybe you get on the Berklee staff or any of them. There's so many music schools. Then it's valuable. But for the most part, I think the best thing is just to be out playing and trying to just hone your skills and find something that you really are passionate about there. So, because I know, you know, I mean, when I went and did this master class at Berklee, it freaked me out because I had played the night before with Judith in Boston, and Victor Wooten and Steve Bailey came to the show. And afterwards they said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" I said, "Well, we have tomorrow off. I'm going to New York. We're playing." And they said, "Can you stick around tomorrow? We'll throw together a class for you at Berklee." I said, "Well, okay, fine." I go in this room, there's like 200 bass players in there, and I'm shitting my pants, you know. But I looked at them, I said, you know, odds are, you know, most of you guys would scare the crap out of me chops-wise, because you're in the deep into it right now and all this stuff. But I really tried to talk to him and said, you know, just understand. I said, one of the things that, I'm getting off subject a bit, but one of the things, like when I look at like the Berklee site or any of these YouTube videos, it's all about chops. I mean, these guys are just sitting there, you know, just you know, hammering away in all kinds of harmonics and stuff like that. I've never seen anybody post, how do you create a bass part for a song? And I said, all that stuff's not going to get you work. It's impressive. It's like going to the NAMM show, you know, or the Music Messe, or any of these shows. You look in these booths and there's these guys that are just tearing it up, but their next job is going to be next year's show when they're doing that again, because nobody's going to hire you for that stuff unless you create a project or you find something that really is built around that. So I just spent most of my time like talking to these guys about that. The school, I said, I don't know if they teach you this, but really the thing that's really critical is to understand how to create parts for songs. To what do you do to make a song better? You know, how do you move that song along? And went through a long discussion, played a couple of examples of things, but guys came up afterwards and they said, it's like the best class we've had, because it addressed things that are not being told. And it's all, most of these guys are just like learning they're just watching all these shredders, you know, they want to be, you know, they want to be Billy Sheehan, or they want to be Flea, or you know, Jeff Berlin, or somebody like that. And that's those guys, you know, and they formed bands, you know, Mr. Big and all these things to accommodate what they really like to do. But for the bread and butter guys, you know, you've got to learn how to, you know, go into a commercial. You get called to go play a Chevrolet commercial or something. You know, you got to know what to do in that, and they're not going to want you doing all that stuff. So it's hard. I mean, academics are important. I could have been a student my whole life. I loved college and I loved studying all kinds of subjects, but you have to find yourself in it. There's been tremendously successful musicians that know nothing about what's going on. Rocco from Tower of Power doesn't read music, doesn't really, but when he picks a bass up, he goes, there's nobody like Rocco. You know, it's just, he found his niche, and that's what he does, and he does it better than most anybody. So you kind of, you know, you find your place in it, and for some guys, college is perfect, and it gives them, you know, I think probably the best thing about it would be is connecting with other people. And you know, you can find guys of a like mind and put bands together until the right thing clicks. But I wouldn't discourage anybody from doing it, but I also don't think it's it's not going to stifle your career if you can get out there. If you really got it, get out and be seen as much as you can, and do as many crappy gigs as you can get your hands on, because somebody's going to walk in a door like I did with James Taylor and see you, and next thing you know, your life is upside down. So.
Also, we talked earlier about the music industry, and I was curious what your take is like on the downfall of the music industry as we knew it. Step one, because of like MP3, iTunes, and now step three, streaming services like Spotify, which in effect causes even successful musicians to starve, basically. I mean, what is your take on it? What do you think could be done?
I think they opened Pandora's box and kind of took the lid, threw it away, and then suddenly realized they'd opened up a nightmare and couldn't find the lid to put back on. I went down to Mexico. There's a music school called Fermata down there. And so I went down, they had me coming down and do a master class. And the first thing I ask usually at any of these things is, how many of you guys download? And they're all going like this. I said, so basically, why don't you just go get a gun and shoot yourself in the foot? Because you're basically not supporting the industry you want to go into. And the idea, when I was young, if I went and bought a record like Sgt. Pepper or something like that, and somebody came over and heard it, that's great. They'd had to go to the music store and buy that record, and then somebody heard it and they had to buy that record. So you sold records. I mean, we used to have record sales in the millions were there. And then when cassettes came along, you could maybe go one generation before it really started sounding crappy, but guys would sometimes duplicate things. But then with the advent of being able to go to like some store and just buy like a CD copier machine, so you could just burn a whole bunch of copies of something, suddenly that was the beginning of the end, the digital revolution. And then those things, so even with CDs, people would say, oh, we're going to do them at our gigs, but we're going to lower the price from like $18 to $12. And I go, if somebody can do it for free, why are they going to give you $12? And so, most of the people I know, they're getting like plays, when you look at numbers, downloads and stuff, if they got $1 for every one of those, they'd be doing great, but they're getting, a half a cent or something like that. So you're just sitting there with like 100,000 plays, and you're getting like maybe $20 or something like that. It's heartbreaking, because the only thing that allows the art to develop is if you can devote your time to it. And if you have to devote your time to a job to pay your bills, and then this ultimately becomes your hobby, then you're not going to be able to reach full potential. And that's where we were lucky back in those days, is I've never had to have another job. Even though I was never in a big group, so I never made millions of dollars, but I've made a decent living over these years, to the point where I never had to go find another job to pay the bills. But with all the downloading and streaming services and stuff, it's just, to me, it's like the death nail in this whole thing. So everybody used to once in a while tour to sell their CDs, and get airplay, and then that's how they made their money. Now everybody's on the road, because that's the only way you can make any money, is when you're out touring. I mean, there's occasional projects that come through, but it's not like the old days. I always hate saying the old days, but there's a truth to it. I've always told people that my mantra for myself is, don't be an old fart. Don't be sitting there talking about, well, when I was a young kid in this, but things have changed. I work with a lot of artists that are in their late teens, 20s, and they don't want to hear about analog versus digital. They've never heard an analog tape machine. They don't know what it's like to sit in front of big speakers and power amps and really crank up the music and hear this much fidelity, instead of putting earbuds in and hearing that much fidelity. So it's a different world, and I accept that because I want to work. I don't want to sit there and be one of these guys who, well, if it can't be my way, then it's the highway. I'm out of here. But it's really kind of sad. I miss a lot of the old technology and the old days of this, of albums that had artwork, and, liner notes.
It devaluates the whole art of music, right?
Yeah.
Because if no revenue can be made, then in turn no money can be put into making it.
Yeah.
So that's why everybody's talking about the demise of the album now, because who's gonna do it?
It's sad. I mean, it breaks my heart, and I don't see it improving. There are projects coming along where guys are going, I want to do it old school, and they dust off a 24-track machine and get their hands on some tape, and we go in and cut with a full band, and sometimes we're cutting like direct to 2-track, and so it's like an almost direct to disc at that point. And it's great, but they're the vanity projects that happen once in a while. It's not the daily routine that you have. Still a lot of somebody's house and just sitting there and putting bass parts on stuff they're working on. And the drag of that is I can only affect the bass part. If I was in a room with a guitar player and he played a lick, and I'll play that again. Let's do something with that. Or you're sitting with a group of players and you go, this bridge sucks. Let's work on the bridge or do an intro or whatever. There were juices flowing in those sessions. When you're sitting by yourself in a guy's garage at his Pro Tools rig, you're not going to have that magic. You can come out with good stuff. I mean, I've worked on a bunch of records that, when you listen, they're really good sounding records, but they could have been that much better had it been really done in a studio. But at the end of the day, what's going to happen to that? Or guys aren't cutting albums; they're cutting singles and EPs, and that's all that they're putting out there, just hoping somebody will pick up on it. So it's tough. I mean, one of the things that I wanted to also talk about is this new band that we're doing called The Immediate Family.
Right.
And this is really kind of hearkening back to those old days, because I'm with the guys I've been with for basically 50 years, looking across the stage at Danny Kortchmar and Waddy Wachtel and Russ Kunkel. And then we have another friend of ours who joined in with us, Steve Postel. But when we went in the studio, we cut it all live. We were in and out of the studio like just in a couple of days, did everything. Danny got a record deal with a Japanese label. I forget the name of the label, like Vivid, I think, something like that. And when he got the record deal, he just thought, hell, I'll call the guys. And we went into Jackson Browne's studio and just plowed right through all of this stuff. And then we went to Japan, gigging that, and in turn did a live album of it. And now we're almost finished with an album of all new material and stuff. But we kind of, like I said to you earlier, I said we book ourselves as a cover band that only plays originals. Because everything that we do, we've either produced, played on, or written. So like with Waddy, we do a bunch of Zevon stuff that they did, like Werewolves of London, and with Cooch we're doing like Dirty Laundry and All She Wants to Do Is Dance. But we're doing these songs the way these guys envisioned them when they wrote them, not the way like Henley did it or James Taylor or Warren did. And the crowds have been loving it. It's just, we're having so much fun with this, and we just got management, and we're gonna see what we can, see what can happen with this. But it's nice at this point in our lives because we have enough other stuff going on where that's not, we don't worry about that being the breadwinner at this point. Maybe down the line we will see some decent dough out of it, but that's not our motivation. But I'm out with Phil, and Russ Kunkel is out right now with Lyle Lovett doing his summer tour, and Waddy was out with Stevie Nicks, and everybody's got other things that are their priority projects. So we're squeezing this in and trying to juggle schedules. But man, it is so much fun. And when I sit with Russ, it's like, like opening the closet and digging through the back, and you find those old worn slippers, and you put them on and go, oh Jesus, these feel so good. There's a comfort zone when you've got that much history together.
That's
cool.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Leland, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview, and all the best for this tour and all your upcoming projects.
We will be back. Maybe we'll be back with The Immediate Family, hopefully back with Judith Owen, do all these things. But
that'd be awesome.
Thank you so much. It's great to see you again.
I will stop the recording for one last time. Now we're getting close
Okay.
to the finale now.
Sure.
So just my files stay small.
No, it's.
Whoa.
Oh, hey. And that's on film, isn't it? Yes! Don't edit this out. Leave this. As a matter of fact. Yeah!
Let's rock and roll for
Rock and roll. Let's trash this place.